during Pam Bondi's testimony, she was asked point blank about the prospect of pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell. Here's what that interaction looked like.
Should Donald Trump pardon or commute her sentence? Should she be released from prison, yes or no? You said you hope she dies there, so I'm hoping the answer is no.
I already answered that question.
Good. I'm very glad. I really like this bipartisan agreement about
when
what
it
should
agrees
happen
with you. But you don't want to talk about Irina Zarutska. You don't want to talk about
I talk about
murdered
her all
by
the
a
time,
violent crime
but I am not
in
here
your
to testify before Congress.
You see how they just deflect? Hello and welcome back to Trend Watch 777. Today I'm talking about the Ghislaine Maxwell. She makes a play for a presidential pardon, but so far Trump, he said no. So shout out to this the new statement where I got this article from. So I'm just going to read just a little bit before we go over there and watch a video regarding this here. So in Congress today, Jeffrey Epstein, British, whatever that word is, and producer of victims, Ghislaine Maxwell, made a play for a presidential pardon. She was beamed into the White House Oversight Committee via video link from the Cushie, Texas prison camp she was moved to last year. Maxwell is playing the long game. She has been angling for a presidential pardon ever since the Epstein scandal resurged into the public mid last year. She refused to answer any questions from the committee, pleading the fifth, while her lawyer said that she would only provide more information in return to clemency. Okay, so the strategy is clear. Tempt President Trump into pardoning her in return for helping him in remaining silent and keeping his name out of it. But like I said, so far he has not, made any move towards that. So over here, now I came across this, shout out to Brian Tyler Cohen, and I came across this video when I was scrolling through YouTube, and it said breaking update on Ghislaine Maxwell pardon. And so this is a pretty recent, and I must have misread it because when I first read it, I was like, what? She got a pardon? Okay. But I'm not sure what's going on with this. So we're going to go over here and listen to the video. And of course, I did not listen to the video. I try not to listen to videos beforehand so I can give you my authentic reaction. Okay, so let's go.
We had some new news here as it relates to the prospect of a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell, that she basically came out and said,
oh, it was Ghislaine Maxwell. I said Ghislaine. Okay, it's Ghislaine Maxwell.
That she's willing to clear Trump's name if only clemency is on the table. First off, is there anything restricting Trump's ability to grant pardons, even if it's so overtly corrupt as this one would be?
Nothing other than the president's conscience restricts his ability to grant a pardon. It's an unfettered power in the Constitution that the president has.
And we know how conscious he is. He done pardoned so many criminals so far.
Total discretion to exercise however he sees fit.
So in this instance, I mean, can I have your reaction then to hearing that kind of quid pro quo made out in public at the hands of or from the mouth of Ghislaine Maxwell?
Yeah, it's really shocking, Brian. The idea that she is trying to trade clemency for exoneration of President Trump related to Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking of children is something unprecedented in the use of pardon power throughout history, presidents generally don't give any serious consideration to pardoning people who have committed crimes that involve the sexual exploitation of children. But Donald Trump has repeatedly said that he will not rule out the possibility of granting clemency to Ghislaine Maxwell, and that seems to have emboldened her and her attorney to really make this pitch to essentially do a deal with Donald Trump where she would get clemency in exchange for giving testimony that exonerates him, according to her lawyer.
Well, in theory, shouldn't any information about accomplices or co-conspirators that the DOJ might be hoping to gain access to by virtue of giving Ghislaine Maxwell clemency, like, doesn't all of that information already exist within the Epstein files? And so going through this whole process of granting clemency to Ghislaine Maxwell would just...
And then even so, if she do come up with something and say that he wasn't involved, he's like crystal clean and, he never stepped foot on Epstein Island, the proof is like he said, they're all in those papers, and then who's gonna believe her anyway? We already know. Allege that Trump was involved with Epstein and his what can I say? Epstein and his Epstein. Let me just say that.
Just offer information to the DOJ that's already at their fingertips if they would just look at it?
Well, having witnesses who will testify about events that they personally observed is always valuable in addition to documents. The Epstein files contain a great deal of documentary evidence and also statements collected by the FBI. But it certainly is always helpful to an investigation to have witnesses who are willing to corroborate what's in documents and provide a fuller picture of what was going on. Ghislaine Maxwell, however, is not a good witness because she has zero credibility whatsoever. She has made it very clear that she is willing to say whatever is in her own personal interests. She's somebody who has been convicted of conspiring with Jeffrey Epstein to engage in the sex trafficking of children. She's serving a 20-year prison sentence, and she's made it clear that she will say or do whatever it takes to get out from under that prison sentence. And there's just no way under those circumstances that we could give any weight or any credibility to anything that she might say.
Doesn't it also seem a little bit counterintuitive when you've got somebody who is Epstein's right-hand man, like the principal co-conspirator to his crimes, to release that person in hopes? And look, I understand the idea of having cooperating witnesses if it means you can nab other people, but generally it goes the opposite direction. Generally, you'll give somebody, immunity.
And then, far as I know, she's the only one who's trying to make a bid, trying to say that Trump is, in the clear. The only one. I don't hear no one else coming out in his defense. So I don't even know. Well, I was going to say, I don't even know what she's trying. I know what she's trying because she wants to get out of jail. She wants her freedom back. So I guess a person in her situation would do everything that they can in their power to try to secure, their freedom.
If they can help you nab a bigger fish. But Ghislaine Maxwell is the biggest fish that's alive right now. And so doesn't it seem counterintuitive to release that person in hopes of maybe getting somebody below her in this chain?
It's very counterintuitive. There is really no legitimate reason to even consider granting Ghislaine Maxwell clemency at this point in time. And the fact that we've even gotten this far down the path of having a serious discussion about it really just illustrates how dysfunctional the justice system is right now and this current administration is. I want to kind of step back to where this all started. This started when Donald Trump was reelected and installed his personal defense attorneys in high-level positions at the Justice Department. As of January 20, when Donald Trump was inaugurated last year, Ghislaine Maxwell was serving a 20-year prison sentence in a facility for sex offenders, and she was likely to spend potentially the rest of her life there. She's in her 60s. But suddenly she's in a minimum security prison, and we're talking about the possibility of her getting out from under the prison sentence entirely through clemency because of what Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's personal criminal defense attorney, has been doing behind the scenes. Blanche himself went to the prison where Maxwell was housed in Florida, the prison that houses sex offenders, met with her over the course of 2 days, which is highly unusual, with a new lawyer who stepped in to represent Maxwell, who happens to be a personal friend of Todd Blanche. And after she spent 2 days answering their questions, she was transferred to a minimum security prison camp in Texas, where she has greater privileges and freedom of movement. This is the type of move that only the Deputy Attorney General could have approved, because sex offenders are not allowed to be housed in prison camps in the federal system. So clearly Todd Blanche intervened there. Todd Blanche appears to have intervened to set her up with this lawyer who's a personal friend of Blanche's. And now this lawyer, David Marcus, is aggressively lobbying for clemency on her behalf by appealing personally to Donald Trump and offering the possibility of exonerating him. This looks like a very corrupt transaction that is being put together behind the scenes by Donald Trump's fixer, his personal defense attorney, Todd Blanche, who now just happens to be the Deputy Attorney General, essentially running the day-to-day operations of the Justice Department.
Wow. You know, we saw this morning during Pam Bondi's testimony, she was asked point blank about the prospect of pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell. Here's what that interaction looked like.
Should Donald Trump pardon or commute her sentence? Should she be released from prison? Yes or no? You said you hope she dies there, so I'm hoping the answer is no.
I already answered that question.
Good. I'm very glad. I really like this bipartisan agreement about
when
what
it
should
agrees
happen
with
with
you.
her.
But you don't want to talk about Irina Zarutska. You don't want to talk about
I talk about her
murdered
all
by
the
a
time,
violent crime
but I
offender
am not
in
here
your
to
jurisdiction.
testify before Congress.
You see how they just deflect? Just bringing up something that has nothing. It wasn't even part of the question. It wasn't even a question at all, for that matter. And she did not answer. She said she already answered it, but just answer the question.
You are. That is your job today.
You're
That's what you're getting paid
obsessed
for.
with attacking.
I want you to know that your own DOJ employee, he's recently been demoted and had some other problems, advises on pardons. Do you think he will be advising Mr. Trump on any kind of clemency or pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell?
I'm not going to speculate, and you couldn't even identify properly. That's why you don't want to talk about Irina Zarutska. You couldn't.
So in that interaction, I mean, she refused to rule it out. And of course, like, she doesn't want to step on Donald Trump's toes, because there clearly exists the possibility right now that Trump is considering pardoning her, because he too refuses to rule out a pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell. Can I have your reaction to seeing, you know, that interaction with Pam Bondi, where she was asked point blank about the prospect of pardoning somebody who she had previously said should die in prison, now refusing to give as clear an answer?
Yeah, it's not surprising that she wouldn't rule it out, because I think everybody knows by now that Donald Trump
I'm not surprised at all.
makes these decisions about who to pardon on a whim without consulting the appropriate people. It would not be the first situation in which Donald Trump failed to consult the leadership of the Justice Department before making a decision to grant a pardon. There have been many cases in which he has undercut ongoing prosecutions of his own Justice Department by granting pardons. So Pam Bondi could easily be blindsided by a pardon, and so she doesn't want to rule out the possibility. But the Justice Department does have a set of standards in place for when a pardon is appropriate to be recommended to the president, and there is not one single fact or circumstance of Ghislaine Maxwell's situation that meets those criteria for a pardon. She is exactly the type of person who should not receive a pardon. So the idea that, you know, the Attorney General can't rule it out is really it's quite out of the ordinary.
Can I have your general reaction to what we've heard from now both Todd Blanche and Kash Patel, this idea that nobody else was involved, that Jeffrey Epstein was apparently running a sex trafficking ring where they traffic girls to no one, nowhere, and that's now been undercut by what we've seen from the Epstein files themselves, which is thanks to Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie. There have been at least 6 names that have been revealed, including one American, including one sultan from some Middle Eastern country. And that's just in 2 hours of them having some access to the unredacted Epstein files. we also know, based on a document that was released a few months back, that there were 10 co-conspirators that prosecutors within the DOJ were talking about. And so, in direct conflict with what we've now heard from Todd Blanche and Kash Patel, just your reaction to the dichotomy of what we're hearing from these DOJ officials to what we're seeing unearthed in the Epstein files.
It is quite bizarre and frankly inappropriate that the director of the FBI and the deputy attorney general would rule out the possibility that there are other criminal co-conspirators without conducting any investigation. Kash Patel has not done any additional investigation. Todd Blanche has not done any additional investigation. They instead are saying, well, this arose during a prior administration and nobody else was charged then. That's really missing the point. It's absolutely true that this is a case and
we know why they're not. We know why there haven't been any further investigation. This administration want the Epstein files, want the Epstein, all of that. They just want it to go away. That's why. I mean, that's why they create so many distractions. The ICE distraction, and now we're distracted. But it's not by this administration's fault with the abduction of Nancy Guthrie. So our focus is on finding, locating or finding Mom Guthrie. So it's just so many distractions, so many distractions. So of course they're not going to further the investigation.
Issue that goes back several presidential administrations. The fact that Jeffrey Epstein got this plea agreement from the Justice Department in the first instance from this U.S. Attorney Alex Acosta, who signed off on a very lenient plea agreement. I mean, that's a terrible travesty. That is a miscarriage of justice. But that doesn't mean that it's not incumbent upon the administration that is currently in power to do what they can to make it right. But they're not interested in doing additional investigation. It seems likely that they don't want to keep digging because there are so many people in Donald Trump's orbit that would potentially be implicated, not only the president himself, but also I believe there are at least 3 members of his administration, including Howard Lutnick and 2 others who are deeply implicated in these files. And so, it's not in their political interest to dig further or to seek justice for the victims. And it's just wrong that is the priority of the director of the FBI and the deputy attorney general over and above seeking justice for the victims.
So Liz, critics are going to look at this and say, you know what? The Biden administration had access to all of these files for 4 years, and yet nothing was released. And so it's not fair to put the onus solely on Donald Trump to have to release this stuff when, previous administrations have been in the same boat. And so what's your reaction to that talking point that's being leaned on by Republicans?
Well, I think it's fair to take a critical look at what prior administrations did, but it's really not helpful to make that the main focus. The focus now should be on the documents that have now come to light and investigating and holding to account those who are culpable at this moment by this current leadership of the Justice Department. During the previous administration, Ghislaine Maxwell was prosecuted, convicted, sentenced to 20 years in prison. So that was a focal point under the Biden administration. And it's now incumbent on this administration, which is currently in power, to seek justice for these victims who have been quite outspoken about what they want. One of the really shocking things that came to light today at Pam Bondi's hearing on the Hill was that the victims have not had any opportunity to meet with her or the leadership of the Justice Department, and they want to. Victims stood up in the hearing room and said that they had wanted to meet with the Attorney General and were denied that opportunity.
And they all look sad. Look at their faces. Look at all their faces. Like each and every, a man too, and then here's a young lady there in the back. Just look at all their faces.
legal obligation of the Justice Department to look out for and protect the interests of victims. And then the idea that the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General would not even meet with those women to see how they can accomplish justice for them is really quite shocking.
Yeah, I think that your points are exactly right. First of all, this idea during the Biden administration, the DOJ was doing its job in prosecuting Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the only remaining survivor of this duo of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, because during the previous administration, Donald Trump's Bureau of Prisons allowed for Jeffrey Epstein to be killed. How he was killed, I'm not sure. We can, that's obviously another video for a different day. But the last remaining survivor of that duo is Ghislaine Maxwell, prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years in prison. So that was the administration doing its job. There was also the fact that during that prosecution, it's not the DOJ's normal course of business to just release all of the files that ultimately helped them in securing that conviction. But beyond that, would I have loved for Merrick Garland to take a more forward-leaning posture on all of this, to have released these files? Sure. But the reality is that looking back to previous administrations is all well and good, but this is an administration that built their brand on this idea that they were going to get transparency and accountability for the perpetrators of these crimes. And so pointing backwards is not going to help you achieve the goal that you set out, that Republicans set out when they were campaigning.
That's what he always do. Biden lives in his mind, Obama lives in his mind. I mean, that's what he do. That's what he do.
Painting on this issue. And so I think, again, doing the whataboutism that we saw so frequently from Pam Bondi today only highlights the fact that this administration was perfectly willing to sell a bill of goods to their voters and supporters on the campaign trail, because clearly they had no intention of doing this stuff once they got into power.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And one fact that I think is particularly notable that's kind of flown under the radar is that the lead prosecutor in Ghislaine Maxwell's case, Maureen Comey, was fired from the Justice Department in July. We don't know that there weren't additional investigations that were going on or additional prosecutions that were being considered. And it is quite extraordinary that the prosecutor who sent Ghislaine Maxwell to prison for 20 years was fired without any explanation. She was undoubtedly the most knowledgeable person in the Justice Department about the evidence against Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and others in their orbit.
She should come out and say something. I mean, really.
Preparing for a major federal criminal trial requires an incredibly in-depth, comprehensive understanding of the universe of evidence and facts. So undoubtedly, Maureen Comey knew a great deal about what evidence is out there. And the fact that she was fired, removed from the building just days before Todd Blanche went to meet with Ghislaine Maxwell and interview her in person is highly suspect. You would think that the Deputy Attorney General would want the most knowledgeable person there conducting the interview. The normal way to interview someone would be to have someone who's in the weeds take the documents and put them in front of the witness and ask them questions and test whether they're telling the truth. But that's not at all what happened here. Instead, she was fired. Blanche went down there himself and interviewed Maxwell, showed her zero documents, asked her no hard questions. And it really it stinks. It smells like some sort of cover up that Blanche is driving to try to protect his boss, Donald Trump.
Last question here. Is there anything preventing a possible Democratic-led House after midterms from subpoenaing Maureen Comey to have her testify about what she does or doesn't know? Is there anything that gags?
That's a good question. That's a very, very good question there.
Former prosecutors that prevents them from speaking out once they're no longer working for the DOJ?
Well, typically when former Justice Department employees or current employees are subpoenaed to testify in Congress, the Justice Department weighs in on whether they believe there are privileges that apply that would prevent their testimony. So the Justice Department could take the position that Maureen Comey is bound by certain privileges, including attorney-client privilege, not to testify to Congress. But in a future administration with leadership of the Justice Department that might have a different view, do. They certainly could waive any privileges or just take the view that there are no legitimate privileges that apply and permit her to testify. Undoubtedly, if she's subpoenaed to testify under this DOJ, there will be some fights about whether she is allowed to talk about what happened with this case, but it would be incredibly informative and helpful to hear from her.
Liz, for folks who are watching right now, where can they see and hear more from you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Substack as Lawyer Oyer, and I'm keeping up to date on all of these developments, so you can follow me there.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Okay, so there you have it. I didn't know this video was that long, but I am going to go end it here. So what do you think, Ghislaine? Did I pronounce her name, Ghislaine Maxwell? Do you think that she should get the presidential pardon or get clemency and be let out and be set free just to harm and abuse other young girls? Y'all let me know what you think. All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and end it here. And y'all be blessed, and I'll see you in my next video. Shout out to my new subscribers. Thank you for subscribing to my channel. And do not forget to also hit the bell notification button so that you can be notified each and every time I drop a new video. Okay, so with that, I'm out. All right. Be blessed, y'all.